Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. If you like to build or repair guitars, I suggest you click that subscribe button down below, and you'll become part of a community of fellow luthiers. And together, we can take your skills to a whole new level. In this episode, I'm going to be covering part 3 of the Echo laminated top guitar build. And in the last episode, part 2, I talked about processing the wood for the body. And you may be wondering, well, what about the neck and the fretboard? Well, in truth, I processed the wood for the neck and the fretboard a long time ago. When I purchase wood for necks and fretboards, I'll usually buy them in bulk, and I will bring them back to my shop and process them into blanks that are the size I like to use, and I'll set those aside and just grab blanks as I need them. And so these blanks were probably prepared 6 months to a year ago. I can't remember exactly when I did it. But what I'm going to be talking about in this episode is I'm going to be gluing up the body blanks and making that laminated top that is the feature of this guitar's build. One thing I have to do as I'm gluing all this up is I have to be thoughtful for the potential for gaps or pieces to shift, because we've got the body, the back of the body itself, the intermediate thin pieces, and then my flame maple top. So in theory, I could glue it all together at once and just ratchet down all the clamps and hope for the best. But experience has taught me that when you try to do that, there's always a potential for something not to be clamped properly or tightly enough, or the potential for pieces to shift. And oftentimes you won't notice that until after you remove the clamps, at which point you realize you've goofed it up. Or I've goofed it up. So what I'll do is I'll share the strategy that I'm going to use as I'm actually doing it. Now, before I jump into this, if you would like to go back and watch any of the previous episodes in this series, at the end of this video I'll post a link to a playlist that I'm creating for this series, which I'll be constantly updating as I produce more parts. And you can go back in and watch each episode at your leisure. So let's jump in and start gluing this bad boy together. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to glue together the mahogany back pieces, and I'm going to use, this is Titebond 2. It doesn't really matter. You can use Titebond Original, Titebond 3, Titebond 2. It doesn't really matter. This is just what I happen to have on hand. And I will just apply the glue. Not a huge amount. I try to minimize the amount of squeeze out. Just keeps things from getting too messy. And despite what you might think, it isn't necessary to have an enormous amount of glue. That just ends up being a waste. So I'll just apply some to the surface. Then I will take the other piece, and then I will put the two together and just move it around. And that automatically spreads the glue across the surface where the two pieces are going to be mated together. Then I'm going to set it down into my pipe clamps. Make sure everything is lined up. And then I'll tighten the clamps. Just a little bit at first. I want to make sure everything is going to be arranged properly. I don't want anything to slide. Now you'll notice there is a little bit of slippage, and that happens as you're gluing. So the way that I will keep the two pieces absolutely flat, what I'll do is I will place a strip of maple Same thing at the other end. You can see how they're uneven. And on the other side, and that brings it down nice and flat. Move this in just a bit. Now, of course, at this stage, the clamps are not completely tightened down yet, since I want to make sure I can make all these surfaces level. But once I have these clamps in place, I can tighten them down. The surface is absolutely flat. And then I can tighten my pipe clamps. Now you'll see I have some glue squeeze out here. I could either wipe that off or I'll just run the blank through my drum sander. I could even take a chisel and just pop it off once it's set up a little bit. So that's how I'm going to glue the top. Now I'll let this sit and then I'll come back and start putting together the other pieces. I left the mahogany blank in the clamps overnight to give the glue a chance to thoroughly dry. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to do the same exact process to glue together the two halves of my flamed maple top. And while this is sitting in the clamps, I'm going to glue the thin walnut plates to the mahogany, and I'll clamp that down. And then tomorrow morning, after the top has had a chance to dry, I can then glue it down, and that will complete the preparation of the body blank with its laminated top. The key to getting a good lamination between halves as well as between all the different pieces that are going to be glued together to form this body is to make sure that all the gluing surfaces are absolutely precision flat. And the way you do this is you've got to have a good joiner, a good planer, and a drum sander. But more than that, you not only have to know how to use those tools, you've got to know how to adjust them so that they function at their best. Otherwise, you're not going to have surfaces that are going to mate up. And you'll know this when you remove the clamps and cut out the body and discover gaps. I've had several viewers ask me if I have a Patreon account where they can send money to show support for my YouTube channel. I don't. However, what I do have is a website where you can purchase plans for electric guitars as well as many of the tools that I use to make guitars. It's called eguitarplans.com, and I'll put a link down in the description below. Think of it as a way to show me support while getting something in return. Now let's get back to the video. When laminating plates together, one thing you've got to do is minimize the amount of glue that you're going to use to do this. I see guys just slathering glue onto their guitar body blanks as well as the back sides of the plates. And then when they glue them together, they have this enormous amount of glue, which can result in a visible glue line when you cut out the body. You can actually see it from the side. So you want to try to avoid that by minimizing the amount of glue. And then what I'll do is I'll attach the plates by making sure that the center edge is lined up with the center line on the body. And I'll just hold that in place with squeeze clamps. Then I'll set a board on top of it and then start using my adjustable clamps to hold everything in place. Now I'll admit, my method of clamping does look pretty third world here, but it does work. And I've considered building clamping jigs for this, but I have yet to find one that is so simple it really warrants the effort to build it in the first place. Now typically you only need to let the glue dry for about an hour with the clamps on, but just to play it safe I left the clamps in place overnight, and then the next day I came back, removed the clamps, and began the process of gluing up the flame maple top. And the process is pretty much the same as when I attach the walnut plates. I first make sure that the center line between the maple top is lined up with the walnut mahogany base, and then I start applying my clamps around the perimeter. Of course, there's really no science or mathematical formula on how many clamps you need to use. You just want to make sure you have adequate clamping pressure all the way around the perimeter. And the key here is to make sure that the mating surfaces are as precision flat as you can possibly get them with your planer, joiner, and drum sander. And even though these thin plates have a tendency to cup or bow, clamping pressure will take care of that. You just want to make sure that the surface doesn't have any wave to it, because if it's wavy, once you take off those clamps and cut out the shape of the guitar, you're going to see gaps and excess glue. Now here I'm using a deep throat clamp with a strip of walnut to apply pressure to the very center of the blank. Okay guys, well that's all the time I have for this episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. I'd hoped to do some cutting on the CNC machine, but I gotta let this glue dry, and I'd like to devote a little extra time to talking about my CNC process. Every time I show videos where I'm cutting with the CNC machine, I get inundated with questions about the process, and it seems like CNC is really starting to catch on with folks, and more people want to know what the whole process is about and how they could possibly get started in it. So I'll be covering that in a little bit more detail in either the next episode or the episode after that. I don't want to make any promises because it seems like every time I do, I run out of time. So until the next episode, make sure you click that subscribe button. Show me some love and head over to eguitarplans.com and buy a set of plans. And until the next episode, take care and I'll see you soon.